Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome all viewers. Have you ever wondered how human beings began worshiping the creation instead of the creator alone? We know that Adam alayhi salam, the first human being, he worshipped Allah alone. He taught his descendants to worship Allah alone. Yet today, we find human beings worshiping other human beings, people who have passed away that they consider to be righteous or special. So they have built statues, they have constructed shrines, and developed entire religions where they are dedicating acts of worship to these human beings that passed away. This is something very concerning, especially considering that associating partners with Allah, committing polytheism, idolatry, shirk, this is the worst sin. So how is it that human beings began doing this? So inshallah, by the end of this video, you will know exactly how human beings fell into this horrible sin. Today I will be reading from the following book, Refutation of Yasir Qadhi's Grave Worship Blunder by Imam Karim Abu Zayd. The great scholar of Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, said that the first origin to polytheism on earth that spread amongst the believers after they were upon monotheism, Tawheed, were the people of Nuh, Prophet Noah, alayhi salam, who started with what? Started with grave worship. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, the root of polytheism and idol worship is from dedication and preoccupation over the graves and taking them as places of worship. In Surah Nuh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said regarding the commencement of the grave worshipping tradition, which was the origin of polytheism on earth, and they have said, you shall not forsake your gods, nor shall you forsake Wad, nor Suwa', nor Yaghuth, nor Ya'uq, nor Nasra. So in this ayah, the people of Nuh mentioned 5 names. Where did these names come from? Well, polytheism, shirk, first started amongst the people of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, when they exaggerated and went beyond bounds regarding the status of the righteous people, which led them to worship them and resist the call of their prophet Nuh alayhi salam out of pride. Abdullah ibn Abbas said, all of the idols among the people of Nuh appeared among the Arabs later. They were the names of righteous men among the people of Nuh. When they passed away, Shaitan inspired their people to build statues in the places they used to sit and name them by their names. They did so, and they were not worshipped until the first generation passed away and knowledge was lost. Then they were worshipped. All the referenced accounts, when compiled together, state the following. These 5 mentioned names in Surah Nuh are names of people who used to be righteous and pious. However, when they died, Shaitan whispered into their people to retreat and sit at their graves. The people began to gather around their graves, wailing and mourning. So when Shaitan saw them mourning and grieving over them, he took the form of a man and came to them, saying, I see that you are mourning and grieving over their loss. So why don't you make shapes and images of them, statues, and place them in your places of gatherings, so that you may be reminded of them? So they said, yes. And so they did what Shaitan suggested. When Shaitan saw how they were excessively remembering them, he said, why doesn't every man amongst you make similar shapes and images or statues to keep in your own houses, so that you can be constantly reminded of them? So they all said, yes. So each household did exactly what Shaitan suggested. Parents started adoring and venerating the statues of these righteous men, while their children were watching. Then Shaitan whispered to those who came after them that they should take them as idols, beautifying to them the idea that you will be reminded of them and thereby follow them in righteous conduct. Until those from the later generation saw what the previous generation had done and considered that to the extent that they took them as deities, gods, to be worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah sent Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, commanding them to worship Allah alone. However, none responded to his call except a few. Thus, the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was fulfilled when he sent Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the final prophet and made his Islamic law the compilation of all divinely prescribed laws, in which he prohibited all means and avenues by which people may fall for polytheism, shirk, which is the greatest of sins. For this reason, building shrines over graves and intending to specifically travel to them, taking them as places of festivity and gathering, and swearing an oath by the inmate of a grave have all been prohibited. All of these lead to excessiveness and lead to the worship of other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now that we have an idea regarding the history of polytheism and how it relates to grave worshipping, let's see what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said regarding this topic, or dead saints. So all acts of worship, veneration, supplication, dua, which should take place in the houses of Allah, are done around the graves and shrines. We see many of them are in a state of weeping and fearfulness and lowliness and humbleness in such a way that would not transpire on a Friday's congregational prayer. They ask the one in the grave for the forgiveness of sins and for relief from distresses and for salvation from the hellfire, and that they discharge the heavy burdens of sin or crime from them. The following are just a few examples of the prophetic warning against doing that. Salama mentioned to the Prophet ﷺ regarding a church she had seen in the land of Abyssinia, which had within it pictures of people. So the Prophet ﷺ said, when there used to die a righteous man or slave from amongst them, they would build over his grave a place of worship, and they would make in it these pictures. They are the worst of creatures in the sight of Allah. When Allah's messenger was close to death, he would cover his face with a cloth, and when it became difficult for him to breathe, or he would collapse, he would uncover it once again. So while in that state, he said, may the curse of Allah be upon the Jews and Christians because they took the graves of their prophets as places of worship. So he warned against what they had done. Was it not for that warning, we would have raised his grave, but we feared that it would be taken as a place of worship. The Prophet ﷺ was heard 5 days before his death saying, indeed, those who came before you would take the graves of their prophets as places of worship. Do not take graves as places of worship, for indeed I forbid you from that. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, the reason shaitan incites veneration of the graves and building structures over them and taking them as places of worship is that it is from the basic principles of polytheism, of shirk, and is its root to take the graves as places of worship. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah stated, from the fundamentals of polytheism, shirk with Allah, is taking the graves as places of worship. Ash-Shawkani rahimahullah said, this innovation has become a means of misguidance, especially the laymen from the masses. When they visit the grave, they see how elevated and covered with costly garments, and added that the illumination of lanterns over it emerges from that deceased individual's belief. Shaitan will not leave him until he eventually calls upon the one in the grave along with Allah, and thus he falls into shirk, polytheism. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from ever going near shirk. May Allah guide us to die upon tawheed. If you would like to read more from this book, just check the link in the description. You can download the PDF for free. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.